And welcome back to the Bitcoin Business Bureau. I'm your host, as always, LitecoinLeader. So today we're also revisiting a coin, and this is one I filmed just last month ago. And just looking back, yeah, I've grown in this channel for sure. The ones back in April are pretty funny to watch. July, I think I did much better. So this is a coin that I mentioned in the last video. Again, I want these to be standalone, but I just mentioned Litecoin. So this one's going to be a comparable one because I think it's got a similar use case. It just has a different name and a different history. So we're gonna go through all of that. And of course, I'm not gonna hide the coins anymore. I gotta get out of that mentality. It's Bitcoin Cash. So we're gonna talk about Bitcoin Cash today. I'm gonna keep almost in the entire video from the last one. Not that I'm really impressed with myself, but I thought it was a pretty good video. So I'm gonna keep most of it. You're gonna see some references to Altcoinopoly. Just roll with them. But for the most part, it stands alone. It's got a good history of Bitcoin Cash, where it came from. The chart looks good. We talk about where the price was and where it might be heading, and it's kind of heading that way now. So we'll take a look at all that. We'll go over the news. We'll go over the charts. We'll talk about the coin, and I've just interspersed information throughout. That's why I'm keeping most of the video, including the back end. So only the intro is going to be new this time, but that makes it a little bit easier for me to create this content, which helps with me working out my schedule. So hey, everybody wins. So here's your video for Bitcoin Cash. Enjoy.
Just a quick reminder that nothing in this video is considered financial advice. I am not your financial advisor. This is not financial advice. Seek out your own advice and do your own diligence, do your own research. Starting with our basic Altcoinopoly board, we take a look at a blank slate once again. We are starting to wrap up the game, so we're running out of spaces, but we have just the right number of spaces left for all the ones I wanted to include for the Altcoinopoly. So we haven't completed on Zone 2 yet, so let's go back over to Zone 2, which is the left side of the board, which is our DeFi and finance section. And I debated what to do with the commuter space on this board. So it was pretty easy for me to pick out like these three major spots on the board for Altcoinopoly. Three of the top coins go there. I mean, it makes sense that these are high-end coins that go in these three high-traffic spots. But the fourth one, right? And I'm not going to tell you which one goes where, but I'll tell you. It was Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum. Those are your big three. That's the top three. When I started back on Coinbase, that's the three coins that were there. But my question was, what would be this fourth one right here? Which one would I choose to go there? What made the most sense as far as a high-end spot that is going to be around for a while and has a good use case? So I took a look at Litecoin. I took a look at Bitcoin, and I said, well, the coin that makes the most sense here really seems to be Bitcoin Cash. Now, Bitcoin Cash has a long history. Well, it goes back to 2017. That's long for crypto. I will go through the history of how it came to be and why it came to be and what the use case is and what the potential is of it. So I do think that history is important at times to learn, and many people have started beyond 2017 and don't know the history going back to where Bitcoin Cash came from and why it even was started in the first place. So that's the coin for today we're going to talk about. It's Bitcoin Cash. It's in the DeFi finance space because I think it has comparable utility to Litecoin. So I think that there is a strong case for it to be a form of digital cash and used for point of sale and day-to-day transactions versus the store value that Bitcoin is, which was part of the debate. So that's the coin for today. We're going to dig into Bitcoin Cash, starting with the history and then some outlook on where Bitcoin Cash could wind up going in the near future. Back in 2017, there was a lot of debate arising on how to handle all the increased traffic that was coming to the Bitcoin network and how it was going to be able to survive and adapt to more utility. And this is one of the first years that I was involved in cryptocurrency, and there was huge amounts of debate on what was going to be done for Bitcoin. And there were several proposals that were out there. At first, we had Bitcoin, where the block size was only 1 megabyte. So that meant only so many transactions could fit into size block, which was created every 10 minutes. So there were lots of proposals that were proposed to change Bitcoin. And the way that gets done is that it's called a BIP. It's a Bitcoin Improvement Proposal. So a BIP gets proposed to the network. The network miners have to vote on saying, we accept this or we don't accept this. And then they decide if it's going to go in the main version of the code, or if there's an argument, there may be a branch or a split or a fork. So that's a lot of what was going on in 2017. It confused a lot of people because that's how we came to be having more than just Bitcoin. We have now Bitcoin Cash, and then eventually Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, which we won't even get into today. But we're going to focus on Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash and how all this happened. So in order to illustrate why this need existed, I'm going to use 3 YouTube videos that I used as references, and they had good drawings and illustrations, so I'm going to borrow some from them, but I'm going to give them full credit. So first is, of course, Guy from Coin Bureau. That's who I refer to a lot. Second one is 99 Bitcoins, which does a great job of explaining what a fork is in this video, plus how Bitcoin Cash came to be. And the third is a lesser known video from a channel called Aimstone, but he had some good imagery, so I'm going to borrow from that. So here's what happened back in 2017. First, there was a big conference called Consensus 2017, where lots of people were talking about 2 of the major issues. One of the issues that was, it's illustrated on this chart, in 2017, due to the popularity of Bitcoin, the transaction fees were getting way too high on Bitcoin. This may sound familiar to those of you who we've been talking about this for Ethereum in the past 12 months. It's happened before on other networks. So this is an issue this was a growing pain for Bitcoin. How are they going to address all these higher transaction fees? In addition, the time to transact in 2017 was sometimes excessive, 20, 30, 40 minutes to get blocks done. And again, we're starting to creep up once again. So what happened back then, so there were several proposals or BIPs that were put out there to say, how are we going to improve the network? One of the first was called Segregated Witness, or SegWit. This is essentially shorthand. So what it is that in part of the block, there's the address that the Bitcoin goes from, and there's also the address that Bitcoin goes to. That's put there every single time. To create shorthand, what they did was they said, okay, we know this address of 30 characters, 40 characters, whatever it is. We're going to give that a shorthand thing so we can shrink that down. And every time, we know this address, and we've seen it before. So now that address of 40 characters, we can associate it with these 6 characters instead. And that's what they did. They made a shorthand. I don't know the exact number. I'm just saying that's what they did. They shrunk the size of it and just said, there's your lookup table of saying this long address is, we're just going to call it 00123. And then we'll put that in the block instead of the 40 characters. That allowed them to get more bandwidth, and SegWit reduced the transaction size by 75%. So it changed that 1 megabyte block, right? It was originally 1 megabyte for a Bitcoin block. It essentially made it 4 megabytes because of the data capacity, because they shrunk it by 75%. Just 75%. It's 4 times as small, so now you have 4 times as much that can fit. So that was SegWit. So that was done to try to speed up the confirmation and the transaction times, get it down. You can't, buying a sandwich or a cup of coffee for $3 back then. I don't think you buy a sandwich for $3. That'd be terrible. Good luck buying a sandwich for $3 today. But the transaction fees were more than $20. So how on earth could you walk into a cafe and buy lunch when the transaction fees exceeded the cost of your lunch? So another proposal was bigger blocks. So by making the blocks bigger than just 1 megabyte, you can fit more transactions in them. That allows for more throughput, faster transactions, lower fees. So larger blocks were also proposed. They wanted to go from 1 megabyte to 2 megabytes in addition to SegWit. So now you have 8 times this capacity, because SegWit gives you a 4x, and now you're giving 2 megabytes instead of 1, and now you have another double, so that would be 8 times as large. So what happened is that they passed, Bitcoin approved SegWit, but they did not approve the bigger blocks. That came later. They did eventually go from 1 megabyte to 2 megabytes. But before that happened, Bitcoin Cash came on the scene. And Bitcoin Cash said, we're going from 1 to 8. And they said that's going to increase our capacity for transactions. It's going to lower the fees. It's going to make us go faster. All that good stuff. So that would lower from Bitcoin's 3 to 7 transactions per second. You get them up to 61 transactions per second. Not nearly as close as Visa, but getting there. So they did a test in December of 2017 after Bitcoin Cash was launched. It was 99% cheaper than Bitcoin. The fees back then were about $28 per transaction. Bitcoin Cash was like 28 cents max. So now it's more like in the pennies versus the price of $5 or $6 for a Bitcoin transaction. So in addition, just to wrap it up, Bitcoin ABC is really a Bitcoin Cash. Bitcoin Satoshi Vision was a later version that increased the block size further. The Bitcoin Cash added smart contract functionality, but that's not the key takeaway. The key takeaway is Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin. Now let me transition over to why Bitcoin Cash and why it's such a good market to get into now. Okay, so Bitcoin Cash. First off, Roger Ver is one of the top people. He's a Bitcoin maximalist. He became very big in the space. He owns Bitcoin.com, and I think he owns WhyBitcoinCash.com as well. So Roger Ver created a lot of debate when this was all going down in 2017, saying not only is Bitcoin Cash better, but it should be deemed the true Bitcoin because it held to Satoshi Nakamoto's true vision of what Bitcoin was supposed to be, which is a means of exchange versus a store of value. You can make an argument for that, but Roger Ver really pushed the envelope and created Bitcoin.com. He bought this, and he promoted the site as being the home of true Bitcoin and made Bitcoin Cash the dominant thing on this website versus Bitcoin itself. Now, back in 2017, as it is today, most of your trading pairs, and even more than today, most of your trading pairs were BTC to something. So Bitcoin was the means of buying almost every other coin. Bitcoin Cash had very, very few exchanges, had few pairings. It wasn't that predominant. So Roger Ver was trying to push Bitcoin Cash as much as he could. So I'm going to include this video here, which is an interview with Roger Ver, and I believe the channel is called, no, it's Roger Ver, huh? I'm not sure of the channel. But I'll include this video in the link here. It was an okay interview, but I just want to point out who Roger Ver is. He owns Bitcoin.com and promotes Bitcoin Cash. But I think the utility of Bitcoin Cash is a lot stronger than people let on. So I think one of the best places to look this up is go to WhyBitcoinCash.com. And quite honestly, this is kind of a North American, US-centric thing. And that Bitcoin Cash is not really used here, even though if you go to Bitcoin.com, you will see that there's a lot of acceptance here. But for whatever reason, the popularity is not as strong as in Europe or in Asia. So walking through WhyBitcoinCash.com really illustrates a lot of the reasons why you might want to get some exposure to Bitcoin Cash. There's some interesting fades on this page, so I'll try to keep them as stable as possible here. Here's some prominent people that we're talking about, Kim.com and Roger Ver, talking about the popularity and how the Bitcoin Cash should definitely be more popular than it is. So, Bitcoin is considered a digital equivalent of gold. It's digital gold. That's what it's the store of value. Bitcoin Cash is the digital equivalent of cash. It is your transactional coin. Why is that distinction important? Well, look at the volume that could be here. First, again, the argument that this is closer to the original white paper. So the difference here is that over 100 transactions per second for Bitcoin Cash versus 3 to 7 for Bitcoin. And the fees are less than a penny, less compared to $5 to $50 for Bitcoin. $50 is a little bit extreme, but certainly no question Bitcoin Cash is much cheaper to use, which is important not only in day-to-day transactions, but also in third world countries where every penny matters. So that's going to matter a lot. So another reason why, again, the US-centric outlook is not necessarily the right thing to evaluate Bitcoin Cash. The marketplace. It is 10 times larger for a cash market in the world than for the gold market. That's on the daily annual transactional basis. So you could make the argument that even though Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin compete with one another, they're competing for a larger pie of transactions and fees per year than Bitcoin is. So again, even if I hate the fades on this page, but even 1% of the global transactions would mean 82 million transactions a day for Bitcoin Cash. That is a huge number. And right now, there are more transactions in Bitcoin Cash than Bitcoin on a daily basis. There it is again. Bitcoin Cash is already doing 120% of the transaction volume that Bitcoin does. So this kind of summarized all the reasons why Bitcoin Cash. Again, all the reasons that you want a cryptocurrency. These are really applicable to Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. So, and then at the bottom, it encourages you to go to bitcoin.com and download a wallet. So there's a lot of good information here, but the main thing is that Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin are doing things differently and have a different use case than Bitcoin. Bitcoin plus the Lightning Network could be comparable to Litecoin and Bitcoin Cash, but in my opinion, Bitcoin is going to be used predominantly for store value and for large transactions, not day-to-day transactions. It's going to be very hard to acquire Bitcoin relatively soon, certainly by the next halving, which should be in 2024. So between now and 3 years from now, I think that Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin are going to be racing going forward, and it's going to be more and more acquisition of those coins, which will drive their values up much more. And when you look at the charts of Litecoin and Bitcoin Cash compared to Bitcoin, there's a lot more room for growth for both those two coins versus Bitcoin. All right, last comment or comments is that let's see. Oh, I wanted to point out, back in 2017, seeing the true value of Bitcoin Cash was a little bit crazy because Coinbase was very, very, very hesitant to add new coins. But what happened one night in December, and I will remember this, is that Bitcoin Bitcoin Cash suddenly appeared on Coinbase. And it took off like a rocket ship. And it just, the price. So what happened okay, let me back up a little bit. In August of 2017, they created a fork. So in August of 2017, if you had for every Bitcoin you owned, you got a Bitcoin Cash, because they decided to fork the network. You would continue to have Bitcoin, but you also have Bitcoin Cash. Let me go to the slide that talks about the fork. So here's a slide that talks about a fork. So you have a soft fork and a hard fork. I won't go into it too in depth, but a hard fork means that you're forced. Soft fork means it's backwards compatible, which means you don't need to do anything. It just upgraded overnight, you're fine. It's kind of like when your phone updates overnight. Hopefully nothing breaks, but you're backwards compatible, you didn't lose any information. A hard fork means you can't go backwards. So what happened was, in August in 2017, they made a hard fork in which they created two different networks, two different blockchains going forward. You have the same history for Bitcoin all the way up until August 2017, but from that point forward, there was the Bitcoin blockchain and there was the Bitcoin Cash blockchain. Some miners chose to go to the Bitcoin Cash. Some miners chose to stick with Bitcoin. So, and if you own Bitcoin, if you owned 5 Bitcoin in July, and then you woke up on August 2nd, you owned those same 5 Bitcoin, but you also now had 5 Bitcoin Cash. The question was, what were they worth? Because there weren't many marketplaces to trade on. And that's why I wanted to show the last graph in the last story, which is that Coinbase had a surprise listing of Bitcoin Cash about a week before Christmas in December in 2017. And all of a sudden, it just went crazy. So it opened for 3,000 and hit a high of 9,500, and then it stopped. They just locked it down. It was up and running, and then they shut it down because it was totally out of control. They couldn't support it. So they just said, whoa, that was a mistake, and they shut it down. It was a huge mistake. They should not have listed it. I don't know who decided to do that. I bet someone internally got reprimanded for it. Who knows? But regardless, it just showed an idea of okay, Bitcoin Cash could be worth a lot of money, but we don't know it yet. So that's why I want to look at the charts beyond the news and get an idea of where things could go, and then take it from there. Taking a look at the charts for Bitcoin Cash over time, we can see that it's very difficult to find legitimate pricing when it first launched. As I mentioned earlier, we had some spikes that happened in December of 2017. On this particular chart, on the weekly at Bitstamp, it was 4,400. If I zoom in a little bit more try to zoom in here. Yeah, it's very difficult. You had like a 4,400 type price in December, but it's that spike of 9,000 on Coinbase is very hard to reflect on the other exchanges because it was really so. It was almost like a flash crash in reverse. It was just this huge spike, and all of a sudden it just went out, and the other exchanges didn't really address it. And Coinbase's chart doesn't really address it well either. So it's hard to gauge with the top end. We see that this 4,000 price, but what's really telling on these charts is that the price was well into the thousands early on when Bitcoin Cash came out in 2018. And since then, it's kind of gone into what you could say is a huge long-term cup with a handle maybe, but it's really bottomed out. It got in the $1,500–1,600 range in April and May, but it's then pulled down into the $500 range again. The lowest it's been was it got below $100 back in 2019. But for the most part, $200 to $500 range has been where it's been trending for most of the last couple of years, except for the recent surge from March through May. So if you look at the price against Bitcoin itself, you can see that the low was essentially in March of 0.009 Bitcoin. It's about 0.015 right now, but the all-time high goes way back to the 2018 timeline, and you have several lines here, which I try to highlight. So you had 0.3 to almost a half of a Bitcoin. So that's your upside. It's very hard to look at the charts and say, oh, it's very clear what's happening, because it's not. There's not a clear picture here. And I'm trying to shrink this a little bit more. There we go. So right now we're at the 0.015. 20x would hit the high in late December, and then you could make a case for maybe even 30x for, based on these charts, if it was to hit those all-time highs. Not saying it's going to hit that, but there's much more upside than downside. So how do you categorize this? Because the chart's not really telling you anything. So go back to CoinMarketCap. According to CoinMarketCap, Bitcoin, $640 billion. It was once $1 trillion. But right now, Bitcoin compares to Litecoin and Bitcoin Cash very similarly. They're neck and neck at 12 and 13. Let's call it $10 billion. $10 billion versus 640. So we're going to call it a difference of 64 times. Now, by going through the earlier chart where we said that the cash transactions are 100 times of a larger market than the gold, you can make the case that the upper bound is like, okay, so let's say Litecoin and Bitcoin Cash, they are huge winners in this space. They split it evenly. Both of them should be 50 times larger than Bitcoin. I don't see it happening. Could you make an argument that each of them could be worth 50% of Bitcoin? I could see that. And that would put them both at 320 billion versus the 10 billion that they're at. That's basically a 30x. Going back to the chart again, a 30x from where we are today would put it at the all-time high, which was right in the December timeframe. So there are those that theorize that was more of a true reflection of price back when Bitcoin Cash at $9,000 versus where we're at today. So this is a market asymmetry. The downside risk seems to me, not financial advice, just my own opinion, the downside risk to Bitcoin Cash at $500 and change per Bitcoin Cash, the downside risk is much lower than the upside potential. So for those reasons alone, I think Bitcoin Cash looks to be in a good acquisition point, much like Litecoin is. So that's what the charts are telling me. And now let's hear from myself once again on how we conclude this video and where we stand overall from a larger perspective on Bitcoin Cash.
So that's today's coin, Bitcoin Cash. It was an interesting history for sure. Lots of things going on. We had the first ever Bitcoin fork happened in 2017. There's been forks ever since for a Bitcoin Satoshi vision, and there's been several Bitcoin others, Bitcoin Black, Bitcoin Gold, all these other different Bitcoin versions that are out there. But the most dominant one for sure in the marketplace is Bitcoin Cash. And there's a good utility for it in the space of payments and just daily transactions. It's a much better use case for that particular flavor of Bitcoin versus the traditional flavor of Bitcoin, and even with the Lightning Network. So the Lightning Network is allegedly going to make Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash be your transactional coin, but Bitcoin Cash is already there. So what's the winner going to be? It's a tough call, which leads me to my coin rating for Bitcoin Cash today.
Taking a look once again at the Bear Altcoinopoly board, and we're in zone 2 today, which is our DeFi and finance sector, and Bitcoin Cash is right there in the middle in a high traffic spot. So the question now becomes, what is the coin rating that I'm going to give for Bitcoin Cash? Quick review of the rating one more time. It's a scale 1 to 5. We've been over it a number of times before. So 1 is the weakest, 5 is the highest, 3 is an average project. So Bitcoin Cash. The rating for Bitcoin Cash is tricky because the use case is comparable to Litecoin. It really is. It's not a store of value. It's a transactional coin. It is used to buy lunch, buy something at the store. It competes with Bitcoin on the Lightning Network. It also competes with Litecoin. There's a lot of utility in it, but the use case is actually stronger for a transactional coin like a daily usage currency versus a store of value. As we saw in the numbers that the Bitcoin, why Bitcoin Cash website points out, there's 10 times as many transactions in the marketplace in a typical year than the system is 10 times larger for transactional coins. So the utility there and the space is there for both Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin to succeed, and both of them could be comparable to Bitcoin or even exceed them in value. So that's a high-end number. That's a high-end aspect of how big Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin could be. But let's just say that both of them combined could wind up being equal to Bitcoin. That to me is a lot of upside. So this is an above average project, but there's concerns because the Bitcoin and Litecoin they compete with Bitcoin Cash. Also, Bitcoin's competing with the Lightning Network to go against Bitcoin Cash, and Bitcoin Cash is not part of the Lightning Network, whereas Bitcoin and Litecoin are. So that's a big mouthful to say that Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Bitcoin Cash are all competing. It's not clear who's going to win. I think there's room for all three, and there's use cases for all three. So I think Bitcoin Cash is above average, but not quite an elite coin. So I give it a modest rating of 3.5 out of 5. I think that it's got good potential. Part of the appeal of Bitcoin Cash is that the price is volatile. So you have to look at that and say, do you embrace the volatility or do you say, no way, I want out? So to me, Bitcoin Cash kind of mirrors Bitcoin in the early days, that Bitcoin Cash can swing wildly. And if you happen to get in at the right point on the chart, you can see a good appreciation in a short amount of time. So for that reason alone, Bitcoin Cash could be a 4 based on however the flow is of the coin is going, but it could be more of a 3 if it's overpriced. So you really have to look at it against the chart and decide that this project, which has good upside, when to get in and when's a good time. So I hate to say trying to time a chart, but you have to look at the charts of Bitcoin Cash and realize sometimes it's a good time to get in, sometimes it's a good time to get out, but there's some long-term upside to Bitcoin Cash because it's going to be in a growing marketplace as physical cash and physical fiat money become less and less used. So now we're going to be going to full cryptocurrency for transactions for Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, and Bitcoin and the Lightning Network. All three could be used. So Bitcoin Cash has a lot of upside in my viewpoint. I give it 3.5 out of 5.
So that's the rating for Bitcoin Cash. It's above average. I can't go much higher than a 3.5 because it's got competition from the Lightning Network with Bitcoin and Litecoin itself, even without the Lightning Network. So all those coins are going to be pushing for it. But what we're really going to have to wait to see is like a couple things. First, Bitcoin is going to have to be consumed by other entities, and it's going to be harder and harder to acquire, which will lead for more demand for both Litecoin and Bitcoin Cash, and maybe even other cryptocurrencies for daily transactions. The other part that's going to be of interest is, when are we going to see more adoption from cryptocurrencies for daily transactions versus cash, fiat, and so on? So with the current banking system that's in turmoil and the financials of the economy much in question going forward, I think that sometime in the next 3 years, before the next halving for Bitcoin, we're going to see an upsurge in demand for both Litecoin and Bitcoin Cash, and both those coins are going to see reflected price increases. So again, not financial advice, but I like Bitcoin Cash going forward. I think having both Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin gives you a nice edge in the cash transaction and the daily transaction space, as well as having Bitcoin itself. So that's where I'm at with this coin. I think it much deserves a spot on the board. It has a good utility going forward. Getting into the right price point, of course, matters. But right now on the chart, looks like a relatively good spot. Not financial advice, but there's all my information for today for Bitcoin Cash. With all that said, I will close the door on the bureau for today, and I'll see you next time.